Welcome everyone to EA Global Summit 2021. This is Sujat from EA Global Summit organizing team. It's our privilege to have Yorrick Tillemans and Bert Dingemans in our presence. Yorrick is the lead solution architect at Dutch Railways. He is involved in everything that has to do with the data warehouse, real-time analyst, network security, and integrations with NS. Because of his enthusiasm and knowledge about Microsoft Azure, he not only knows how to make a solid ArchiMate design about this, but also how to create support. He uses a Sparx Enterprise Architect as a modeling environment. Outside NS, Yorrick advises other organizations and it's available for quality assurance reviews. Bert is an independent data architect based in the Netherlands who is using Enterprise Architect for all his modeling activities. Therefore, he maintains two open source add-ons, the Integration Data Entity Architecture Helper and the Web Publication Platform. They both are presenting Azure Data and Analytics, ArchiMate, and Spark Enterprise Architect, a powerful combination. And I also thank everyone for your interest in joining this session and for your kind information that we will be muting all the participants throughout the session. So please use the chat window to drop your questions to the speakers. Your queries will be answered at the end of the session. We request everyone to visit the allotted Microsoft Team channel named as EAxpertise to communicate with Yorrick and Bert after the session. Yorrick and Bert accepted to stay in the channel to have one-to-one discussion and answer all your queries. The link to the MS Team channel is posted in the chat window for your quick reference. If you have any difficulties in connecting to Teams, please let us know through the chat window or write us at registrations@eaglobalsummit.com. Thanks once again for your interest and support to EA Global Summit 2021. Without any further ado, I'll request Yorrick and Bert to start their presentation.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe to some, depending on from where you are connecting. We're thrilled to have you here in this session on Azure, ArchiMate, and Sparx Enterprise Architect, and how we combine these three. This will be a session provided by Bert Dingemans and myself. We have in the session, we have approximately 45 minutes and we have quite some ground to cover. But first, a quick introduction. Bert will introduce himself when he presents his part of this session. So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Yorrick Tillemans. I'm from the Netherlands, and as introduced, I'm working for the Dutch Railways for the data and analytics part. Especially, I'm specialized within the Microsoft Azure cloud, and within the Dutch Railways, we are setting up a complete cloud environment for data and analytics, which I will talk you through. On the slides that I'm now sharing with you, you see the LinkedIn from Bert and from myself, and if you would like to stay in touch, please get connected using LinkedIn with us. Before I'll dive into the topic, just a short outline of the session. I will first give you some context about the environment. So what are we doing at Dutch Railways and what's relevant to know before we dive into Enterprise Architect. Then I will hand the session over to Bert, who will share his part. And in the last part, I will be back with you to show you in Enterprise Architect about how we have modeled our Azure platform in the application and technical layer. So those will be the main parts of this session. And as said, please post your questions in the Teams channel, and Bert and I will be happy to get back on your questions and comments. Okay, so some context about what we are doing here. Well, the Dutch Railways, we are in the Netherlands, of course, providing the train services. And just like for any other organization, data is vital for us. We are collecting all data from the Dutch railways in a centralized platform which is hosted in Azure. You can think about traditional systems, the databases which we have. We have sensor data. Within the Netherlands, you travel typically by a chip card, which you check in when you are departing and check out when you are at your destination. So that's all real-time data coming in. Train sensor data. Almost all our trains are what we call smart trains, so they provide us with hundreds of metrics every minute. And I just also showed you here a visual about maybe something you don't directly think about, but even in the tracks are sensors, which in this example is actually measuring the weight of every individual wheel of a train, which provides us information about how the load, for example, passengers are distributed over the train, and of course also provide valuable insights, which we can then process for example, preventive maintenance. So there's lots of data coming in, all centralized. We're having two parts in our platform. One is the more traditional focused business intelligence, so data warehousing, and the other part is what we refer to as advanced analytics. Advanced analytics are, for example, real-time insights, but also artificial intelligence models, which we'll also have in our service. This slide, I forgot to update. Here it says we still have 120 employees. We're getting close to 200. So despite also COVID and all the impact it has also on the Dutch railways, we are actually fast growing because of the importance of data. And as a full platform, we are providing dashboards, reports, but we also are more and more providing data to apps. So apps for our passengers, where is maybe still a seat available in this train. At this moment, that's not such a big challenge within COVID, but before COVID, that was actually a very handy feature for most of our passengers, but also apps which are used for my colleagues who are on the trains, for example, providing if there are likely to be technical issues with, for example, a door or any other thing that might be relevant for them to know. So that's a bit of context about what we're doing. Here I shared you a visual about the context in where we are working. Please don't try to focus on all the details in all the blocks, but I modeled here all the roles that are relevant for my direct colleagues and myself. We are the block with the red line, marked with the red line. What you see in all the colors is that we are our stakeholders are, of course, business and data teams with the product owners, of course, management, data platform administrators, compliance officers, and enterprise architects. The takeaway, I think, from here is, of course, just like in any organization, we have to align and agree with many different roles. And because of the importance, we are also having to work under the direction of enterprise architects who are overseeing the complete company of NS, which is, for your reference, approximately 20,000 employees. So we are, of course, a small part of a larger company, and because of the importance, we are working under their directions. So also our modeling have to comply with their modeling. Well, we are now in a team of 6 solution architects covering, let's say, over 190 engineers. So that's a bit how we are organized. And as mentioned, we are focusing on Azure as our platform. And within Azure, we have a principle that we have a strong focus on PaaS and SaaS services. So EA services will be, really, we have to try to avoid those. Okay, so looking into what we are doing as a data platform for the Dutch railways, and this is, of course, very complex, and we're having many different parts that we are delivering. What helped us is actually to divide those into a few main architectural building blocks, which we actually modeled as application services. I'll get back to in Enterprise Architect later on in this session, but what really helped if you are building up a data platform is typically you start with one team with smart engineers, and you just do the extraction of the data, you are processing it, and you make a good deliverable information product to the business. This works, but soon you will be actually running a scale issue. You are actually then building silos. What we do to govern this platform is we have defined different application services. I'll get later on all the details which are behind there, to break up solutions in individual modules, or if you are more thinking in ETL, configuration items. This really helps to divide the complexity of a simple product in different modules, which each have its own life cycle and responsibilities. This was actually helped us a lot to keep this complete platform with all these engineers working in it under governance. So here I shared the main services that we are providing and our interfaces with the other departments and even external parties from the company is on the data sources. Of course, those are hosted mostly in the business, sometimes external data sources. All the blocks in the middle is all the services that we provide, and our interface back to the business or even external stakeholders are the information products. But more on this a bit later. Then I will now hand this slide over to Bert, and please can you also introduce yourself.
So, as already in the first slide, welcome everybody. My name is Bert Dingemans, and I am a consultant for Enterprise Architect, and I support the team that Yorrick already mentioned. So I support them with developing solutions, but also introducing approaches in how to apply ArchiMate in a data architecture. What we started with is that we started to create an architectural community where the architects work closely together, and they are introducing step by step their approach of working. They are introducing the building blocks, but as I will show you in a minute, they are also defining tools that can be helpful to make work easier for the architects, and they are introducing viewpoints in ArchiMate. And very important, because we want to have everybody involved, we introduced a weekly ArchiMate peer review. We call it an intervision session, where models are shared, where we discuss about issues in, for example, our ArchiMate viewpoints or in our building blocks, and based on that, we work in a kind of an agile approach, where in a weekly manner items are discussed and then assigned to one of the architects and solved in the period after that weekly session. Viewpoints very important in enterprise or in our model. The building blocks we introduced, we started by creating viewpoints for that, and what you can see here is that we created quite a simple model when you compare this to the full ArchiMate model of all elements that are there, and based on that we even created smaller viewpoints. We modeled this in Enterprise Architect, so the meta model of our architecture is in the same repository as the architectural model is, and this is helpful for us to validate our models based on the viewpoints we created. Also interesting is what you see is, although we have quite a large platform in Azure, in Microsoft Azure, is that you see that we have chosen to use only a small number of the infrastructural elements, and technology service and artifact are the most important elements here in our model. But Yorrick will dive into that later in this session to give you more details about how we solved this problem. I'm going to switch to Enterprise Architect to show you a number of elements we have introduced. Important, the repository configuration. We do a lot with navigation cells and navigation diagrams. And here you see what Yorrick already briefly mentioned. Here you see the model we created, how the data flows through our data landscape within Azure. So data is entered here, and here is a service for defined. Data is ingested in our department, and it flows to the next step. And what I can do here is I have the possibility to see how this is implemented in our environment, which functionalities are there, and based on that I can dive deeper, and in the end you will see how we implemented this, with which components we implemented the various functionalities in our landscape. Also, the viewpoints are defined in this way, and again there is also a navigation diagram. For example, here I can show the application layer, how we model this. You see here the behavior, the passive structure, the elements that are introduced, and here on the right hand side you see how we implement it with interfaces and application components. What's further interesting is that we have again here created hierarchy diagrams for the different elements when this is relevant. For example, here the data objects, the data source objects, the data entities in the raw data zone, in the binary data or a common data zone. So based on this, you always have the possibility to first give an overview in a glance, in an overview diagram, but when you want to have the details, you are able to navigate to the detailed diagrams. Some helpers we introduced. This one is really helpful. This is an ArchiMate helper for creating elements in Enterprise Architect, because it is a large repository and we have numerous modelers in our repository. This is a combination of the toolbox and a search window. So what I can do here is I can say, well, I want to search whether an element is available or not. So I can say, for example, we have a sub element, and what I can do now is I can select one, and when I want to, I can add it to a diagram I am currently in. So here a fast combination of search, the toolbox, and eventually also creating a new element. Other one, and that is really a nice feature in this, what we introduced, is that it is possible to make use of the model wizard. I have to activate it, the solution wizard. And what happens here is that you have the possibility, we have created a template for all our solutions of our building blocks, and these solutions can be transferred to a project specific implementation in a working area of a certain architect. And I will give you a demonstration. I can here select my templates that are there. The template is a package in Enterprise Architect, which is configured in a special way. And what I can do now is I can say, well, I want to have this in my working directory. And I say here, okay, it is the AR Global Summit solution I'm going to introduce. I can give it a short description. And what it does now on the background, it will process all the elements that are relevant, and it transfers the project specific elements already to the name designed here. And what you will see now is that it on the background will do all kinds of transformations. And here you see that it opens the diagrams. You see here that it has designed the elements which are specific for the project to the name of the project. And what I can do now with this wizard, I can say, well, I want to add specific elements from the repository, or I can create new elements, and I can generate these elements, and I can make it specific for the solution I'm introducing here. Big advantage of this approach is that it makes it possible that also people who are less familiar with ArchiMate are able to create solutions in an easy and in a supported manner, but also in a manner that keeps in mind what our viewpoints are. the last element I want to show you is that we introduced a number of approaches in the architectural modeling. And here, this is the welcome screen for a new modeler in the team. It gives him or her a description of how we are modeling, what the agreements are. But even more interesting is that we created a screen, a site with all kinds of instruction videos for new modelers in our team. So this makes it possible that people, when they are new in the team, get a good way on how we are dealing with architecture within the DINA architecture team within the Dutch railways. So I demonstrated the most important aspects. We created a model-based perspective that is extensively discussed in a session yesterday about simplifications of the UI, and we also applied this element. And what we will do is we will provide the XML file for this model-based perspective as a material, as an extra material for this session in the AI Global Summit. I will hand over to Yorrick. He is going to discuss the elements for how we configured ArchiMate, and we will get back in the discussion later on in the Teams side. So thank you for your attention.
Hey, thanks, Bert. I will take over. Maybe what's interesting for to know, Bert already just shortly discussed here the core elements, as we call them, these selection of object types, element types that we are using here within our repository. Maybe it, as Bert already mentioned, let's say the audience, the users of this repository, my, let's say, 200 colleagues, they have little to no knowledge of ArchiMate, and they are for sure not experienced. Most of them are engineers. We want them to work with this model, and when we selected these element types, we did not only do that with the architects, we also involved, well, other people from the department just to think along with us, and so we can also understand what their needs are and what their logic is. So our purpose was to make a model, a core model, a viewpoint, which is as simple as possible, which is not in contradiction with the ArchiMate standards. So we are using the definitions as described within the ArchiMate standards for each of the types that we selected here. Yeah, as said, we want to keep it as simple as possible. Another thing which will not go much further into in today's session, but we also kept in mind in this, when we created this viewpoint, how we can automate this. So we are currently working on, can we create a wizard when teams are actually making their solution outline? To understand, the users, as said, will be everybody within the department. How will it look like? We are working according to agile principles. And of course, there are many implementations and ways how you can work agile. We are working with the SAFe framework, the scaled architecture agile framework. And typically what you will see is that teams will say, okay, we'll just find out along the way how our solution will look like. That's how I typically see how agile is explained within these environments. This is sometimes very difficult to combine with ensuring your compliance on the platform. Compliance with, of course, GDPR, privacy, enterprise standards, but also with our own platform standards. So how to combine both agile and the quick time to market that, of course, can be achieved with it in, let's say, governance on your compliance. Our approach on this was to have teams at design time, so before they start building, already have a create a design and register that here in this repository. Well, that's a challenge if you got 200 people not working with ArchiMate. So how we did this is making a simple model to achieve this. And as said, also we will also make this a sort of a wizard, so people can actually make it easy to select patterns that have been worked out. So there is an incentive to use patterns, so to reuse generic solutions. It's easier actually than to create a complete new solution. But of course, if that's necessary and there's a good motivation for it, of course we can do that as well. So that's the whole thought behind this. What I'll like to focus on, and then we'll dive a bit deeper in this. Yeah, so we got all the layers. We don't have the time to go deep dive into them, but we are focusing mainly on services, which I also said in the context session when we started here. One is the application service. So this is actually getting back to those major steps, how our data platform is built up. And you can, well, more or less think about it like it's the same sort of thinking as you would have with a microservice. So it has a dedicated task within the data platform, and services communicate with each other via applications, so which we also have in a hierarchy. Services also always have functions, and a function is related to application component. So this will help in our application component rationalization. So we keep track, because it's easy to have many application components without a legitimate function in your platform. So this is how we can also govern this. For the architecture, so the Azure resources that I will get to you in a minute, this is something which is very debatable, but we chose that every Azure resource, we modeled it as a technology service. The thought and motivation behind to choose this element type a technology service is that much of the, let's say, hard infrastructure, much of the iron is of course being taken care of by the cloud vendor, in our case Azure. So that's why we thought it would be legitimate to make this and model this as a technology service. Okay. How will that actually look like? Our approach was first to make a few hierarchies. So just to start with a simple one, each application service, so each module which a team will create, of course, has some trigger, and that could even be real-time, event-driven, or time-based. And if it is time-based, we have it in a few high steps. So it's either let's say near to real-time, few times a day, week, month, and of course you can think of more. But we just have it a bit in a high over category. Reason for this is that if you have another service consuming from your service, you want to see, okay, what's the frequency about the refreshes of your data which is coming out. Application functions, I think Bert already touched this. This was actually quite a challenge. So if you, for those who are familiar with Architura, they will actually recognize here that we use much of the Architura engines and methods which they have within their big data patterns. If you're not familiar with Architura, I can definitely recommend you to look at it, because it, in my view, this is actually the right grain to make to define these functions. It's not too detailed, but it's detailed enough for your to map it on your applications within your environment. And handy is also if you're doing tool selections. You might assume that also vendors, if you refer to these functionalities or engines, that they are standard. So it's a common language you speak. Okay, so more focusing now on Azure. Just like in any other cloud, your resources, you can mainly split them up in compute and storage. So your compute resources, that's what you typically map to the application functions that I just showed, for example, processing or a data transfer. If you're looking at your storage devices, for example, in a storage account within Azure, will also have those defined as functions. So, sorry, I see I forgot to translate some of it. This in, oh no, sorry, these are in English. So typically you can, so for example, see that as a distributed file system, if you're talking about blob storage. If you're talking about, for example, an Azure SQL, that has two roles. You can see it both as an OLTP, and of course, you might also use it for processing if you're running, for example, stored procedures on it. This is also very handy to also list the type of storage, because we are now implementing a Snowflake warehouse, which is a distributed warehouse. And to many, it doesn't really matter what kind of a database it is, but it is very relevant for your solution, because a distributed warehouse will actually have different behavior and will also ask for different solutions than an OLTP database. That's very handy if you can also assign that to a function. Okay. Good, and also in the interfaces we have an hierarchy, but I think you get the point. Okay, so let's now go into the infra layer of Azure. For those who are maybe not familiar with Azure, just a quick introduction. In Azure, everything you use, all your resources, all your Azure resources, they have a hierarchy. So if you have a resource, it's always in one resource group, and one resource group is always in one subscription. And if you are a larger company, and even for our own department, so it's only just a part of Dutch Railways, we have multiple subscriptions, which you can group in what they call a tenant. So you have a very clear hierarchy. Well, I just show you here, all the services that you see here are all subscriptions that we at this moment have, and I expect we even will get more. You can probably understand that if you get multiple subscriptions with all the hierarchy layers that are below it, it gets complicated quite fast. And therefore it helps to also model this. So I modeled all the subscriptions which are in our department, so in our governance responsibility, and that helps. The thing which you then have is that if you have the Azure subscriptions, of course, you also have the lower hierarchy level, which is the resource group. I modeled resource groups, including their resources which are within them. And so that's you can also roll this back to the subscription. For those who are familiar with Azure, you might think, okay, why would you all do this by hand? Because this is a lot of work if you have many resources, and resources you might even assign to different resource groups and even different subscriptions. This is all possible within Azure. Well, bear with me, I'll show you how we automated this. Another nice thing is that if you model resources, you can, of course, also add more information to it. So, for example, this is a Windows virtual machine. And one of the things you definitely want to administrate, which you do with software, is which operating system we have on there, and even also which system software we applied on this. Of course, for your lifecycle management and compliance, this is very relevant to do. Also, which is, I think, today more an issue and also getting more hot, is how to model your networks within Azure. More and more companies are switching over to networks using virtual networks, VNets, within your subscriptions. This is how we have actually modeled that. So also a network is a resource which is allocated to a resource group. And you can also model it to, for example, network security groups, which you can see as a simplified firewall rulings. Okay, so just to show also how you can have these different levels. As promised, we can automate the import of these resources. So if you would go into the Azure Portal that I'm now showing, this is just for this session, I just created a dedicated resource group with just a few sample resources of course, if you look at all our subscriptions, you can all select them, and you get a long list with hundreds of resources. What you can simply do is you make a selection, which is just a standard functionality of the portal, and you export it into a CSV. Well, I already did that as a preparation for this session. What you then do is we made a consultant that we had with us, and he created a nice import functionality. So you just go to the Azure Resource Importer, browse to the file, and then you see the same. Oh, these are actually different because I did these yesterday, but you get the point. And you can also select which type of resources you want to import. We typically don't select them all because it's not all relevant for the architecture, for the architectural repository. So you make a selection, and if you've done that, you just import them. And you just get a log telling which items are updated. And the nice thing is, it's not only importing it, it's also creating the relationships. So what it does, it adds everything in a folder, and if I just select all these imported resources, you'll see it's also building up all the relationships between them, because you can actually extract those from the export that you took from the Azure Portal. So this helps a lot. And if you move a resource from one resource group into the other, or between subscriptions, it will automatically reassign it. So this is an easy way to make sure that whatever you have in your repository models the status, the implementations within Azure. So if you're interested in this, I'll just quickly show the contact details. Oh, sorry, they're not in here. I will share them in the chat later on with you, but with the person who built this. And so if you've got other requirements, or you're also interested in a functionality like this, you can of course contact him, and he's happy to help you. Okay, good. So maybe just looking at how we all take this together. So Bert explained how we got this working, who we involved. We talked about how we have these different application services, so let's say architectural building blocks. And I also explained that we want the data teams at design time to actually make a design, so we can ensure it's compliant. So now let's see how that looks in this repository. So we're just taking a functionality of ingestion. So this is what Bert says. This is in the architectural building block. We said that it has to contain these functions, and optionally you can also introduce these in your solution. Okay. So what a data team is expected to do, and we'll build them actually a wizard for them, so it's more easy, as easy as we can make it for them. So we have an ingestion, so they will build what we call a module, which is let's say, a child of ingestion. They of course have to use all the application functions which are in the ABB, and the architectural building block. And what you'll see here is that they can actually use a pattern. And this is one of those patterns that we are prepared for them. So they can just select this, and automatically it will be linked to the functions, and the functions are linked to their module. If we look into this, you can see, so this is already within a solution building block. You can see which components, so which actual solutions we are having in this pattern, and what functionality they have within this pattern. So you see we are here using Apache NiFi, which actually 2 clusters, both sitting in a different hosting location. What type of functionality they have, and this is actually very handy because most people will not see an Apache NiFi cluster as also storage, but it does have it. So for compliance, it's very good to also assign it to this application function, because of course we have to take care of GDPR and other compliance there. Processing engine. So here is how we make the actual application components mapped to application functions. So the infrastructure is also serving these application components. And as you can see here we can even zoom in. I'll zoom in on this part because this is actually not in Azure, this is on our on-prem. So this is again jumping back into the infrastructure. So I can look up where these are within which resource group, which subscription, but you can also see this technology service is actually grouping, and we having it's all these virtual machines are logging it within this log analytics workspace. So also for compliance, you can see which where the logging is going. You can see which actual virtual machines are in here, and you can see the entire cluster, which operating system it has, which version of Apache NiFi we are running, and for those who are maybe a bit more into NiFi, if you're using NiFi with Azure PaaS services, then it's very handy to use the special processes for that. So those are actually, let's say, add-ons on the software. So without getting too deep into it, sorry for the layout, we even have those. And it's relevant to know because, of course, these also have their own life cycles which you need to manage. So you can see which networks they are sitting in, what their NICs, the network interface cards are. Let's say they're more or less their IPs. So for a team, they can just select this pattern, this solution building block. Most of the time, they will just see, okay, these are these components, and they know what we're talking about. But if relevant, or if you have to set up connectivity, you can zoom in on the infrastructure layer, which you see is mostly built out of technology services and networks. We model them as communication networks and connections as paths. So I just showed you two NiFi clusters which are talking to each other. One is in our on-prem data center to extract data from our on-premise data sources, and the other one, which I just demoed, was the NiFi Azure cluster. Don't focus on all the details, but within this building block, you can also see the networks and all the paths and the express routes and all the locations which are relevant for compliance and resilience. What if a data center fails? What impact will it have? What peerings, etc., etc. You can all model it within this layer. And this makes it very powerful because, especially when we are extracting sources from different hosting environments, setting up the connections is typically something you will have struggling with, and it's very handy to have it modeled. So data teams can just select a solution that's appropriate to them, and they can easily zoom in on what connectivity should be created. And that's lots easier, and it helps to get them motivated to use this repository rather than looking in old documentation on SharePoint, Confluence, and all these other sites, which is usually difficult to find. So already within a few solutions, we got their, let's say, buy-in. Another thing which also helps if you are thinking about making certain common resources. So we are within our business intelligence part using Informatica. Well, Informatica is for many of the engineers just a service that they can use, but of course it's also an application component. For them, this is usually enough to model. So on the application layer, they can just use this application component. But it is relevant to know that if we want to provide them as, let's say, Informatica as a service, that there's lots of infrastructure below this. So there's a cluster. We have different virtual machines with a load balancer. Of course, we have logging and we have backups, etc. So this is relevant for, of course, a team that is keeping up the service to have this all modeled. And of course, our compliance officers and security officers are also needing this for their audits. This Informatica service needs to talk to the data warehouse, to landing zones, to HCN sites, clusters for processing, and everything of these connections are also modeled. What sort of interfaces are they using? which networks are involved. And typically what you also see is that, well, this is not a good example, but you also having to connect between subnets, so private IPs, and the Azure backbone. So in other words, this is very good to focus on where are your edges for your threat model analysis. And you can model everything which is behind the server, so key vaults, SQL databases, everything. Maybe this is a bit detailed, but the key takeaway is if you model your infrastructure with the simple viewpoints that we created, in our use case, we think we can put all relevant aspects, so the operating system, the connections, the networks, we can all put them in there, and it serves it. So we can all model it. And it also, with the connection that it actually has with the application layer, it facilitates the data team so they can make easy designs. So they can say which part of the platform they're working on, and we're trying with a wizard to make things even easier, and they can just use all the underlying technology. It's too detailed for now to say how we do that for PaaS, but we also have a solution for that if you are interested in it. And so the technology, they can just easily say, okay, what should we use? What are all the consequences and implementations of it? Okay, so that's a lot of detail. I hope it was not too much, and it's the message was clear what we try to tell you here. I see we are already at the end of our session. Thank you for attending. It was a pleasure to share. And Bert and I will now go into the Teams channel. And if you have any comments, questions, we'll meet you there. If you like to stay in touch, you can find our LinkedIn profile name in the slides that we showed earlier, and I can even get them on the screen if you are.
And we will share the presentation as a PDF in the Teams site, so you have all the information from the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, so thank you for joining. I hope this was interesting and relevant to you, and see you next time, or maybe we'll meet you now in the Teams channel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Yorrick and Bert. I thank Yorrick and Bert on behalf of everyone for making this session a wonderful one. And I thank to everyone for your time and support throughout the session. Hope it's very informative and gives deeper insight into the topic. Now, Yorrick and Bert will be available in EAxpertise MS Team channel to have a detailed discussion and answer more questions. The link to the MS Team channel is posted to the chat window for your quick reference. If anyone is having any difficulties in connecting to Teams, please reach us at the chat window or write us at registration@eaglobalsummit.com. Thanks once again, everyone, for your time. I'm looking forward to host you all in another wonderful session shortly. Thanks, Yorrick. Thanks, Bert.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Cheers.